The Secret Path by Paul Brunton. Chapter 1. With a Wise Man of the East. Some years ago I wandered for a while through sun-baked Oriental lands, intent on discovering the last remnants of that mystic East, about which most of us often hear, but which few of us ever find. During those journeyings, I met an unusual man who quickly earned my profound respect and received my humble veneration. For although he belonged by tradition to the class of the wise men of the East, a class which has largely disappeared from the modern world, he avoided all record of his existence and disdained all efforts to give him publicity. Time rushes onward like a roaring stream, bearing the human race with it, and drowning our deepest thoughts in its noise. Yet this sage sat apart, quietly ensconced upon the grassy bank, and watched the gigantic spectacle with a calm Buddha-like smile. The world wants its great men to measure their lives by its puny foot rule, but no rule has yet been devised which will take their full height, for such men, if they are really worth the name, derive their greatness not from themselves, but from another source, and that source stretches far away into the infinite, hidden here and there in stray corners of Africa and Asia. A few seers have preserved the traditions of an ancient wisdom. They live like ghosts as they guard their treasure. They dwell outwardly apart from this spectre race, keeping alive the divine secrets which life and fate have conspired to confide in their care. The hour of our first meeting is still graven on my memory. I met him unexpectedly. He made no attempt at formal introduction. For an instant, those sibylline eyes gazed into mine, but all the stained earth of my past and the white flowers that had begun to spring up in it were alike seen during that one tinkle of the bell of time. There in that seated being was a great impersonal force that read the scales of my life with better sight than I could ever hope to do. I had slept in the scented bed of Aphrodite, and he knew it. I had also lured the gnomes of thought to mine for strange enchanted gold in the depths of my spirit. He knew that too. I felt too that if I could follow him into his mysterious places of thought, all my miseries would drop away. My resentments would turn to toleration, and I would understand life, not merely grumble at it. He interested me much, despite the fact that his wisdom was not of a kind which is easily apparent, and despite the strong reserve which encircled him. He broke his habitual silence only to answer questions upon such recondite topics as the nature of man's soul, the mystery of God, the strange powers which lie unused in the human mind, and so on. But when he did venture to speak, I used to sit enthralled as I listened to his soft voice under a burning tropic sun or pale crescent moon. For authority was vested in that calm voice, and inspiration gleamed in those luminous eyes. Each phrase that fell from his lips seemed to contain some precious fragment of essential truth. The theologians of a stuffier century taught the doctrine of man's original sin, but this adept taught the doctrine of man's original goodness. In the presence of this sage, one felt security and inward peace. The spiritual radiations which emanated from him were all penetrating. I learned to recognize in his person the sublime truths which he taught, while I was no less hushed into reverence by his incredibly sainted atmosphere. He possessed a deific personality which defies description. I might have taken shorthand notes of the discourses of this sage. I might even print the record of his speech, but the most important part of his utterances, the subtle and silent flavor of spirituality which emanated from him, can never be reported. If, therefore, I burn literary incense before his bust, it is but a mere fraction of the tribute I ought to pay him. One could not forget that wonderful pregnant smile of his, with its hint of wisdom and peace won from suffering and experience. He was the most understanding man I have ever known. You could always be sure of some words from him that would soothe your way a little, and that word always verified what your deepest feeling told you already. And yet, in its settled moments, his face bore an expression of deep melancholy. Still, it was a resigned melancholy, not the bitter, rebellious kind one so often sees. You knew that at some period of his past he had suffered some inexpressible agony. The words of this sage still flame out in my memory like beacon lights. Quote, I pluck golden fruit from rare meetings with wise men, end quote, wrote transatlantic Emerson in his diary. And it is certain that I plucked whole basketfuls during my talks with this man. Our best philosophers of Europe could not hold a candle to him. But the inevitable hour of parting came. Time turned around this old globe of ours. I went back to Europe, busied myself with one thing and another, and quite lately prepared to return to the East once more. I proposed no less a thing than an exploration right across Asia, an exploration that would continue my old quest of the last surviving exponents of genuine Oriental wisdom and magic. I hoped to wander through the yellow deserts of Egypt and among the wisest Sikhs of Syria, to mingle with the vanishing fakirs of remote Iraq villages, to question the old Sufi mystics of Persia in mosques and graceful bulbous domes, tapering minarets, to witness the marvels performed by yogi magicians under the purple shadows of the Indian temples, to confer with the wonder-working lamas of Nepal and the Tibetan border, to sit in the Buddhistic monasteries of Burma and Ceylon, and to engage in silent, telepathic conversation with century-old yellow sages in the Chinese hinterland and the Gobi Desert. My kit was almost packed. My last few papers were being put in order, and I was nearly ready to leave. I turned my face away from the crowded street of the great city in which I lived. London is a roost for every bird, wrote shrewd Disraeli, and I must be one who is somewhat old-fashioned. I like quiet London of 18th century streets and dignified old railed-in squares, and I regard them as welcome bases in a prevailing desert of noisy modernity. I see the satin-coated and the knee-breeched ghosts of a past century when I walk around the pleasant grassy squares at night. I dislike the London which provides a stage for countless motors and hurrying people. I am fond of the London which hovers around the wide Thames at places like Rotherhithe and Wapping. For there, among the picturesque old wharves and barnacled quays, I stroll in an atmosphere quaintly redolent of the sea, and I watch romantic-looking craft come and go on the river. I prefer to see a weather-beaten barge take its tranquil way down the Thames to a painted demon of a lorry pursuing its nerve-wracking, noisy route along the street. And so this fateful day I sought a few hours' escape among certain friendly trees in the green countryside. I found them after traversing rolling chalk hills, winding lanes, and quiet beech woods. My eyes became half closed. The harsh, confused noises of thronged towns had faded, and I was once more sitting in almost trance stillness. It was not long before old habit reasserted itself, and I expectantly drew out a worn notebook. I sat down in the lush green grass, pen in hand and book upon the knee, seeking to cast my net upon the delicate thoughts and beautiful moods which swim across the heart when all is still. It is in such solitary rural silence that I have often felt more at ease than in many a city drawing room, and it is when accompanied by such silvery beaches that I have often felt a more beautiful and sincere presence than with any human beings. It was the mellow autumn season, and all around we were the gold and green tinted leaves which lie down to die in such profusion when the life of the year begins to fail. The late afternoon sun shone generously upon everything around. The hours slipped past one another. The soft murmur of a few insects rose and died away as they flew through the air. But still the pen lay motionless between my fingers. One waits beside the silent shore of the mind for the coming of exalted moods whose fragile bodies are as gossamer. So soft are they that if one does not cast one's net aright, the rough chords of mortal tongue will slay the tiny wanderers with brutal touch. And so shy are they that one must sometimes wait long before the first timorous alien will venture into the net. But once a few captives have been gathered together, the reward descends rich upon one's heart. In this spiritual element lie all the fragrant hopes of man, waiting like so many unplucked flowers for the soft hands which shall garner them for the sightless people. These visitations of a loftier mood provide one with jewels for one's writings. In such sacred moments, one touches the infinite. Sentences form themselves from the ether. One hardly knows how. Phrases disengage themselves from the skies and descend upon the sublunary world to feed one's pen. One must yield to these mysterious moods and not resist them. Thus does one render oneself worthy to become a mediator between the immortal gods and frail, forgetful man. Today, however, I thought I had waited in vain, and so closed the book and replaced the pen in my pocket. Soon the strange hour of twilight would shade the face of time, and then the soft feet of night would creep into the halls of day. Thereafter I would rise up from the fallen trunk where I had moodily pondered in vain, and with slow steps I would stumble homeward over the darkened fields and through woods which overripe leaves had carpeted a rich brown. But instead there came a strange pause, and a film fell across my eyes, making the sense of slight oblivious of the earth world around me. The ichor leapt in my veins, flinging the sluggish blood aside, while a great yellow light seemed to shine within my heart. A hand seemed to touch my shoulder. So I raised my hand and looked upward to find a benignant face bent over me. And he whom I had known in the Orient, the wise one of the East, appeared before me, his grave, bearded face as clear, as recognizable as though he were there in the flesh. Certainly, he came to me with a tread which was as silent as the fall of fresh dew. I made the humble obeisance of my heart in venerations and greeting. His strange eyes turned remonstratingly upon me. He said gently, "My son, it is not well. Hast thou forgotten compassion? Shalt thou go forth to add to the store of knowledge while others starve for the crumbs of wisdom? Wilt thou commune with the divine ones when there are those who look for God but perceive only the impassable barrier of the sky? When there are those who throw their prayers to a void which returns no answer? Stay thy feet, if needs be, but forget not thy fellows in distress. Leave not for the lands of waving palms until thou hast regarded these words. May peace be ever with thee." And thereupon, without another word, he passed out of my vision as silently and mysteriously as he had appeared.